in one weekend, I've told this story many times, and I don't want it to be overemphasized because I only spent one weekend doing this. But I was writing a science fiction script, and I just came up with the idea of putting Atlantis in Antarctica in the science fiction script. Now, I went off to the library and started to do some research about Atlantis, and that's when it turned from being a script into a research project, which I then continued on for decades. And what I found at the library was a map of Atlantis that was in a book created in 1665. Athanasius Kircher, he was a Jesuit priest living in Rome, and he had access to all the loot that the Romans had taken from the Egyptians. So he found this map, and he reproduced it in a book in 1665. And that map, which you often will see, is a map of Atlantis, supposedly in the North Atlantic Ocean. And it's peculiar in the sense that there's a little compass on it that points down, which means that north is down. So you have to turn the map upside down to get our orientation. I came to that map with the concept of, hey, listen, rather than turning the map upside down, maybe we should turn our globe upside down and look at it. And at that time, I came across Charles Hapgood's book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. And in it, for the first time for me, there was a picture of an ice-free Antarctica. And the thing that struck me about it was that Kircher's 1665 map of Atlantis was a remarkably similar map to an ice-free Antarctica. And of course this is in the book Atlantis Beneath the Ice and on our website under Atlantis in Antarctica. But the thing about it was it seems more than coincidence to me. It seems, because I knew that in 1665 Europeans weren't capable of determining longitude at sea. That didn't happen until the 1770s. Yeah, see, for what it meant to me was that, hey, now there is a piece of physical evidence, this map that Kircher published in 1665, which is a remarkably accurate map of Antarctica without the ice. And we didn't know what Antarctica looked like, even vaguely, about beneath the ice until 1958. That's like 3 centuries after Kircher's book had been published, and that's using seismic surveys to do it. Now, the maps of Antarctica are getting more and more and more sophisticated, and of course, you now also have to take into account ocean level as well, because we have a different ocean level now than there was 12,000 years ago when Atlantis was supposed to have existed. So, that was the thing that really got me. It was the Kircher map of Atlantis being what I believe to be an accurate map of ice and ice-free Antarctica. And the south is up is an ocean that was common in Egypt. For Egypt, south is the top, ancient Egypt. We regard the north as up and the south as down. They regarded the south as up because that's where the Nile came from. The water came down from the south to the delta. The top of the world, as far as the ancient Egyptians were concerned, was the south. So south is up. So when you take a globe and start to look at the world from south is up, that is one of the keys to understanding how Atlantis has been lost to us because of our own worldviews and also the worldviews that we are trying to filter through. Our concept of ancient worldviews are prejudiced by our assumption of our superiority And I believe, and this has been the essential thing that I believe about Plato's account of Atlantis, which he himself regards not as his own invention, but as simply as a story that had been passed through his ancestors, who in turn had taken it from Egyptian priests, who in turn had recorded records from survivors of Atlantis. So the story that is told in Plato's dialogues of Timesius and Cretius about Solon, who was Plato's ancestor, going 200 years before the time of Plato, but Solon went to Egypt, and he encountered a priest there and got to him talking about the Great Flood and all the things that had happened in the past. And this priest gives a description. He says, oh, Solon, you Greeks are but children because you remember very little of the ancient past. We, on the other hand, have all these records, and some of our records go back 9,000 years. And so that takes us to 9,600 BC, because Solon was in Egypt around 600 BC. So 9,600 BC, because that's an important date to remember. In any case, what happened, and here's the interesting thing. The priest, who I through other research, I learned his name was Zonkis, because he was also the tutor to Pythagoras, who was contemporary of Solon. So he taught Pythagoras for 22 years. He had an encounter with Solon when Solon was visiting in Egypt. Well, and that's where the story of Atlantis begins, as far as we know, is that Zonkis tells Solon about Atlantis, and he says, and he tries to describe where Atlantis is to Solon. But Solon's worldview, which is the ancient Greek world, was pretty limited. So he didn't understand what was said, but he was very good at memory, as all the Greeks were at that time, because this is before the times of writing being popular. Really, writing became very popular with Plato and Aristotle 200 years later. Really, pre-Socratic philosophers were oral tradition. So they were very good with their memory. So what Solon did is he recorded this description of the location of Atlantis, and in his memory, passed it on to his ancestors, who eventually came to Plato, who was the first to write it down. Now, even Plato, in my view, didn't understand it. He just regurgitated it, if you like. And people have been trying to understand this because there's peculiar notions in it. A real ocean, a whole opposite continent. These are notions that are very, very, very peculiar. That's my feeling, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Without it was their very ignorance that allowed us, because what I'm saying and what I have been saying and Rose and I have been saying, and When the Sky Fell, and then also in the Atlantis Blueprint and Atlantis Beneath the Ice, is that this account is the most sophisticated scientific account of the Earth's geography that we have even as of today. It is the most sophisticated. In 2 or 3 sentences, that the description of the entire planet's geography is accurately depicted from the point of view of Antarctica. And that's the thing that throws people off, because we can't imagine looking at the world from Antarctica. But once you start to look at the Earth's geography from Antarctica, then everything that is said in Plato's account makes sense. The main thing to understand about the Greek worldview is, first of all, they believed that the world was a disk. The world was spherical, but the land part of it was in the northern hemisphere and surrounded by water, completely, all north, south, east, west. So, all directions, if you went far enough, you would encounter the same ocean, which they called the Atlantic Ocean. Now, so the Atlantic Ocean doesn't just refer to the North Atlantic Ocean like we do in the European-centered view. It also refers to the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean. It's the whole ocean. So inside that disk are three subdivisions. There's Europe, which is pretty well contemporary with what would be most of Europe. It's pretty similar to what Europe looks like today in terms of geography. But then there had two other features. They had what was called Libya, which we would call North Africa. So it includes all of North Africa, and it's quite a large area. And then what they called Asia, which today we would call the Middle East. So as far as and to the extreme west, there was the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Strait of Gibraltar. Now that has two different meanings to the Greeks. One meaning is the extreme western edge of what we would call the Mediterranean Sea. That's the extremity of it. And that is, and that's one meaning, that actual strait there. The other meaning was more of a psychological thing. It was the end of the known world. The thing about it, and Plato says it, and so does other Greek writers, poets and stuff. They say, Pindar, for example, says, what lies beyond, we know what he knows. Because what happened is that people would go beyond, but they wouldn't come back. So that was a barrier. So when we say that Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, it doesn't mean it was to the west. Plato never used the word west, or the Sonkas never used the word west. He said it was beyond the Pillars of, in other words, beyond the Mediterranean Sea. And so it could just as easily be in the Pacific as it is in the Indian. Okay, so that's the Greek worldview, and what we have now come to in our present day, in our satellite time, what I would call now a scientific point of view, is that I'm going to skip over the European point of view because people probably think they know that, but we'll discuss that a little bit. But let's go right to what is a really scientific point of view of the Earth's the planet Earth. First of all, it's, mostly water. And it's one ocean. Yeah, and it's a one continuous ocean. If you take a globe and look at Antarctica and ask yourself what ocean it's in, today, using our European concepts, what we've invented is this Antarctic Ocean, which is simply an imaginary barrier, which is the polar zone, around Antarctica. And then it's also in the South Pacific, it's in the Indian Ocean, and it's in the Atlantic. So we're thinking of different oceans, but there is, according to oceanographers, and this is what they teach in oceanography today and have been for 20, 30 years, is that the Earth has but one ocean, the world ocean. And this is interesting because in the account that the Egyptian priests gives of the location of Atlantis, he calls the ocean that Atlantis is in by two names. He says it's the Atlantic Ocean, and he also calls it the real ocean. And he says one other thing about it. He says that the Mediterranean is but a bay of this big ocean, a small bay of this big ocean. And all that is true when you start to look at the Earth's geography from a scientific perspective. And because it's not just oceans, there's only one ocean, but we have, in our European-orientated point of view, we see the world from Europe, and that's the way geography has developed because of history. For example, the Middle East. People in the Middle East don't call themselves Middle Easterners. Don't call themselves Far Easterners. They call themselves, they're in the Middle Kingdom. So every place has their own center. And the problem with the European point of view, and the history of exploration, which was undertaken by Europeans, is that those perceptions have blinded us to the scientific nature of the description of the location of Atlantis in Plato's account. So the other thing, of course, in this description is a description of the continents, and there's this thing called the whole opposite continent that surrounds the real ocean. So here's, just as the Atlantean point of view that Zonkus articulated to Plato's ancestor Solon was of like a dartboard. In the middle is Atlantis. It's an island. There's a couple islands off of it, and then there's this big real ocean, and then surrounding on the edges of this, all the way around this big ocean, is a continuous landmass, one continuous landmass, which they called the whole opposite continent. Now that includes, and you can see this in the book and also on our website under the Atlantis and Antarctica, that includes like South America, North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia are all part of one continuous landmass. So from the geographic point of view, from a strictly scientific point of view, a continent is a continuous landmass. Well, in the time of Atlantis, you could walk from the tip of South America to the tip of Africa and never have to cross the ocean. So all of those land masses, South America, North America, Asia, Europe, Africa, are continuous in terms of being able to walk them, just as the world ocean is continuous. So fundamentally, from a strictly scientific point of view, and with a southern prejudice as opposed to a northern prejudice, and because the Atlanteans were a southern hemisphere, and then I can give other reasons why that is the case, but their perspective is very much Atlantis in the middle, couple of islands off, and then you find this whole opposite continent which encircles the real ocean. So here's I'm just going to read to you the actual words that Plato wrote when he recorded the words that had once been spoken at 600 BC. And it said that Atlantis was larger than Libya, that's North Africa, and Asia, that's the Middle East combined. So that's exactly the size of Antarctica. If you've seen our map that we can show you, that Antarctica is almost exactly the size of North Africa and the Middle East combined. From it, that is from Atlantis, there were passages for seafarers of those times to reach the other islands. These are islands that are now beneath ice. And from them, the whole opposite continent, which surrounds what can truly be called the ocean. For these regions, that is the Mediterranean, that lie within the strait, that is within the Pillars of Hercules, talking about, seem to be but a bay having a narrow entrance. But the other ocean is the real ocean, and the land that entirely surrounds it may be, with the fullest truth and fitness, be named a continent. Those are the words. My claim is that is an advanced scientific account of the Earth's geography as seen from Antarctica as it was 9,600 BC. That's right. And the thing that made this possible was that there was a U.S. naval support force in Antarctica, and they drew this map from Antarctica, which is also on our website and also in the book, which shows the reality of the real ocean, the one ocean. They use this map in texts on oceanography to explain to everybody that there is but one ocean, the real ocean. And the rest of the continents do surround it from that perspective. What we're saying here is that there was advanced geographic knowledge of the Earth's entire planet, encapsulated in 2 or 3 sentences that were put into recorded history, passed from an Egyptian priest to a visiting Greek dignitary, who passed it on to his son, and then his nephew, and then it came to Plato. All of academia today, and I can go into the origins of this, but right now, is that everything is an exaggeration, that Plato's exaggerating. It's not 9,600 BC, it's 960 years ago. Or it's not bigger than Libya and Asia, it's between Libya and Asia. And, they have to, everything has been, and this really started with Charles Lyell, who was the founder of modern geology. He's kingpin of geology, the grand master, the Darwin of geology. And he begins his book, which was a huge seller in the 19th century, starting out with saying that he's disbelieving the flood, and he thinks that the Bible, it shouldn't be the source, which may or may not be true for our understanding of anything, and that we have to really rely upon what we see in the present and everything, and that all these myths about a great flood are just exaggerations of local events. This is the thing that again, in addition to giving a scientific point of view of the world from the southern perspective, he pinpoints the time of the Great Flood to 9,600 BC, which is commonly regarded today as the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of what we call the Holocene, the end of the Pleistocene and the Holocene. It is the pivotal point in geography and geology that from our modern era. And it's an era of melting ice caps in North America, rising ocean. For 6,000 years the ocean rose, and now it's starting to go down again. But during that first part, there was tremendous flooding. And the Zonkas, again, the Egyptian priest, who had access to the Atlantean records, said that there was an explanation for the Great Flood that is related to the story of Phaeton and the falling sky. And of course, we go into that quite a bit in our book. The falling sky flood myths are also called the sun deluge myths, and they are around the world, all around the world. People using different mechanisms, if you like, have the same story, which is there's a change in the sky, most often measured by the sun not going its normal way, or the stars, or the sky falling, and then the flood comes. So the flood is the second event. The first event is the falling sky, or the change in the sun's position of the sun in the sky, and that we, of course, are using the theory of Earth crust displacement to explain that. Charles Hapgood he went to Harvard. His teaching was interrupted by the Second World War. He also went to university in Germany. He was fluent in German, and he was in Germany during the rise of the Nazis. So when the Second World War broke out, he came back to America and joined the OSS, which was that was what the CIA was known at, Operations of Special Services. They were the first spy agency for the American, and he worked in that department because he had inside knowledge about Nazi Germany.
Sure.
After the war, he got picked up by a couple of different colleges, and he became a professor. And then in the early 50s, he got interested in Atlantis, and by students kept bringing it up in his history of science classes, and so he started to investigate it a little bit, and and through that, he also had a friend, an older fellow, in his 30 years older than he was, and who was a physicist, and he understood. They first came up with the idea that there must have, what destroyed Atlantis, that's what they were interested in. Their first thought was that it must have been a change in the Earth's axis, that somehow the axis of the Earth changed. And when they started to investigate that, that's when they, of course, began corresponding with Albert Einstein. Now, Albert Einstein his material is recorded flawlessly. Everything that he wrote to everybody has been recorded by his secretary, and it's in their archive. Anybody wants to go into and see whether or not there was correspondence between Hapgood and Einstein can now do that online, and just put in Einstein and Hapgood and Jerusalem, and that'll probably do it. Anyway, this correspondence between Einstein and Hapgood led to him modifying his idea that it wasn't the Earth's axis that shifted, but just simply the outer shell of the Earth, which is called the crust, or the scientists call it the lithosphere, outer crust of the Earth. Some parts of it are ocean, some parts of it are continent. Don't think of them as the continents being separate. They're all part of the same shell. Sure. And the outer shell of which is only 1/3 of 1% of the Earth's mass, wow, is shifted, and when it shifts, of course, you move from you might be in a temperate zone and you ended up in a polar zone, or you might be in a temperate zone and you end up in a tropical zone, or you could be in a temperate zone and end up in a polar zone. And that's what happened to Atlantis. It was a third of Antarctica, the side, it's called, people now call it Lesser Antarctica. It's still the size of Western Europe. The side towards South America, we contend, was temperate before the last Earth crust displacement, which occurred at 9,600 BC, just as Zonka said it did. And a third of the continent, the other 2/3 was under ice. It was still a white continent, and there are mentions throughout world mythology of the notion of a civilization in the middle of the ocean that was white. Now, Antarctica was white even then, and of course in the winter it would be all white. But in the summer, a third of the continent, and again, this is a huge continent. Don't forget that Antarctica is about the size of the United States. So, it's a big area, and it was temperate. And moreover, it had ocean currents going all the way around it from all directions that would have warmed it. So it would have been warmer than even the latitude. Some of the latitudes that it were like at 55. But, that's like parts of Alaska are like that. Sure, you get winters. It's pretty mild as well. I live on Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada, and we don't get snow as a novelty. It's a real novelty. I mean, practically everybody shuts down just to enjoy it. I'm at the 49th parallel, so like 2 degrees below London, say. So, we have a mild climate here because of the ocean. The Pacific Ocean is bringing warm water to us. And the same thing is true of Atlantis. And in the Atlantis blueprints, we talk about the Atlantis Channel, which was because the continent and the ocean levels were different. There was a series of islands off of Antarctica, and there was a strait that went between and these other islands, and that would have brought warm water through there, and that would have made it warmer than even the latitudes indicate. We were getting into some heavy-duty correspondence. I started in 1977 corresponding with him. And then what I decided to do with the Earth crust displacement theory to try to give it credibility was not to say anything about Atlantis, because, that's taboo, but to show that theory of Earth crust displacement could be an explanation for the origins of agriculture. And so I researched for a year or two the origins of agriculture, and I showed that the kind of climatic change that was predicted by this Earth crust displacement that Charles Hapgood created in association with Albert Einstein can explain the geographic location of the origins of agriculture around the world. And I sent that off to an academic journal in Canada. It was Anthropological Journal of Canada. It was the first one I sent it off to, and they made it the lead article. But then nothing happened. Like it just, even though people, I've shown that this problem, the origins of agriculture, which is pretty important to civilization, can be explained, and it's been around for 150 years, people trying to explain it, can be explained simply with this theory of Earth crust displacement. That has been my mission. That's what I have been doing. And the thing that's frustrating, we were talking about learning of his death. I was in London at the time. I was reading at the British Museum when the library was still in the museum. Well, what a library resource! When I was living in British Columbia, it took me 6 months to get a rare or odd book. When I was in London, it would take me an hour. So like I was just reading up the storm when I was there. Anyway, I was supposed to have lunch with Rose, because I was expecting this correspondence from Charles, and Rose came up with a letter, and it said return to sender deceased. And I later learned out that he was killed as a pedestrian in an automobile accident. So his last letter to me, he had spoken of the possibility that civilization was much, much older, and that letter was the basis of the Atlantis Blueprint book, which I wrote with Colin Wilson. But it was very, very disheartening to have him die prematurely, just as our correspondence was really starting to heat up. But I had corresponded with him for 5 years, so I got a lot out of it, and I do consider him my mentor. And I do consider that I have tried to be his protege.
It's the braking mechanism. That's what I think.
You are absolutely right. That is exactly right. The equatorial bulge acts as a brake upon the displacement. Otherwise, in space, once something starts moving, there has to be something to stop it. Otherwise, it just continues. So we would have had this not only a revolving thing that we're going through with the Earth's axis, but we would have also had this other thing happening, going like north-south and south-north kind of thing, as well as east-west happening, and then we would just be in this, like in a spinning ride at an amusement park or something. Here's the thing that I agree with. But here's the thing that I think that really puts it into perspective. We know that every place on the Earth has its antipodes, that is, there's an opposite side of the Earth. New Zealand is nearly antipodal to the British Isles, a little bit warmer. North Pole, South Pole, China, South America, South Asia. Yeah, okay. So opposite to the area that we're talking about in Lesser Antarctica, which is the part towards South America. This is where we think Atlantis was. Opposite to that is Siberia and Beringia. So Siberia, Alaska, and the landmass that no longer exists, huge, all that area up there. We have extensive Russian scientific and American in Alaska investigations showing that area, during the last ice age, supposedly, there wasn't ice. There was all sorts of animals living there. Animals, they call it like, large scale, not just the mammoths and mastodons, but deer and antelope and cherry. There's a 90-foot cherry tree found on the New Siberian Islands. So, and these are now well within the Arctic Circle. Yes, that cannot, these problems, when a problem in science cannot be explained by the prevailing paradigm, they're ignored. They just ignore them. And until so many of them pile up that there has to be a breakthrough and a new paradigm comes about. And I believe that Earth crust displacement now is a paradigm shift. I think anomalies are signposts to discovery. And if you ignore them, you can just stay on the main highway.
Yeah.
But if you see an anomaly off the main highway, and it's a real problem, then follow it, because it's going to lead you to a discovery. If I could say one thing to anybody who really wanted to understand how science really operates, and this is something that Einstein emphasized again and again, and he did personally to Hapgood, it's curiosity. Keep your mind curious. Look for things that don't fit. Who cares about the things that fit? Things that fit are, okay, that's done. Let's look at the things that don't fit. Because when we look at the things that don't fit, I have on our website I have a section called Bits That Don't Fit, just about things that don't fit the prevailing notions of what science is or isn't. You know, if you don't have curiosity and you're not willing to chase those anomalies, then all you're going to get is regurgitation of what has happened before. You'll get refinements, and sure, but you won't get breakthroughs. And this is why, when you look at Thomas Kuhn, who is the most famous sociologist or scientist, he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And the reason he said that so many of the scientific revolutions have occurred by people who weren't taught in the discipline in which they made their discovery was because they didn't have the fixations of that. They weren't indoctrinated into the paradigm, and then that indoctrination. Einstein said another thing. I don't know how curiosity survives the education system. You know, so like this is it. Anomaly, anything that doesn't work, and again and again, the big scientific breakthroughs occurred not by people who were taught in the field, people who came from outside the field and looked at the situation like a child. 65 map of Atlantis was a remarkably similar map to an ice-free Antarctica. And of course, this is in the book Atlantis Beneath the Ice and on our website under Atlantis and Antarctica. But the thing about it was it seems more than coincidence to me. It seems, because I knew that in 1665, Europeans weren't capable of determining longitude at sea. That didn't happen until the 1770s. Yeah, see, for what it meant to me was that, hey, now there is a piece of physical evidence, this map that Gurkha published in 1665, which is a remarkably accurate map of Antarctica without the ice. And we didn't know what Antarctica looked like, even vaguely, about beneath the ice until 1958. That's like 3 centuries after Kirker's book had been published, and that's using seismic surveys to do it. Now, the maps of Antarctica are getting more and more and more sophisticated, and of course, you now also have to take into account ocean level as well, because we have a different ocean level now than there was 12,000 years ago when Atlantis was supposed to have existed. So, compass on it that points down, which means that north is down. So you have to turn the map upside down to get our orientation. You know, I came to that map with the concept of, oh, hey, listen, rather than turning the map upside down, maybe we should turn our globe upside down and look at it. And at that time, I came across Charles Hapgood's book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. And in it, for the first time for me, there was a picture of an ice-free Antarctica. And the thing that struck me about it was that Kirker's 16th, and what I found at the library was a map of Atlantis that was in a book created in 1665. Athanasius Kirker, he was a Jesuit priest living in Rome, and he had access to all the loot that the Romans had taken from the Egyptians. So he found this map, and he reproduced it in a book in 1665. And that map, which you often will see, is a map of Atlantis, supposedly in the North Atlantic Ocean. And it's peculiar in the sense that there's little in one weekend. I've told this story many times, and I don't want it to be overemphasized because I only spent one weekend doing this. But I was writing a science fiction script, and I just came up with the idea of putting Atlantis in Antarctica in the science fiction script. Now, I went off to the library and started to do some research about Atlantis, and that's when it turned from being a script into a research project, which I then continued on for decades.